everybody. I'm Dr. Gina Wong, co-founder of the Asian Gold Ribbon Campaign and a psychologist and professor. And I am just thrilled to be here for this interview today. I'll let my colleagues here introduce themselves and I'll share a little bit more.
Hi everyone, my name is Samantha Louis Poon. I'm a nurse and also a PhD candidate at the University of Alberta. And I'm also the anti-racism director for Asian Gold Ribbon.
Hi, my name is Sylvia Yu Friedman. I'm an author, filmmaker, former journalist, and I'm the author of A Long Road to Justice, Stories from the Frontlines. It's my memoir and details my journey of investigating the trafficking underworld across Asia. And I describe my coming of age story, and I'm just thrilled to be here today. Thank you.
We are so honored, Sylvia. I just love to share how we first connected. I think that was from Sandy,
Yes,
who kind of joined us together over email. And I had an amazing meeting with you and your husband, Matt, and sharing and talking about your work, things that I'd never really known about and still am learning. So it's been very eye-opening. And I think for our Asian Gold Ribbon, viewers and just for the general public to have an understanding and even the language that that you use. I think there's so much that we need to learn. So we're so happy that you agree and allow us to feature you in this AGR video and interview. I want to start with the first question, and really, just for free, we'll jump in. It's really conversational, but we have lots of burning questions that we have, and I'm sure our viewers also want to know about you. So just to start off, Sylvia, we would love to know more about your family. Tell us about where you live and some of that history.
sure. Yeah, so I moved to Beijing in 2004. But before then, I grew up in Burnaby, and my parents had immigrated to Vancouver from South Korea when I was 2 years old. So basically, I felt like a white person trapped in a Korean body because I had come of age and attended elementary school in an all Caucasian neighborhood. And because kids back then weren't exposed to other cultures, they said some insensitive things that really scarred me in that time period in my childhood. I was called a chink. I was called other derogatory names. I was made to feel, rejected. I felt ugly because, I didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes or brown eyes. And I really longed to be Caucasian. How terrible is that? So I did have happier memories, but for the sake of this gold ribbon campaign against Asian hate, I wanted to share this aspect of my childhood. And so when I saw the attacks on Asians during the pandemic, it triggered me. And I felt like, wow, this reminds me of the 80s. This reminds me of the time when I was growing up, when people weren't culturally sensitive, and when Vancouver and its suburbs in Greater Vancouver region weren't as multicultural. And I was so shocked and really sad that how could it be, when there's more than 50% Asians and people of color in the lower mainland of British Columbia. And, there are people going around punching, elderly Asian people or slapping and hitting young Asian women. And so that, it reminded me of some of the objectification and just feeling like, oh, I'm an Asian woman and I didn't have a voice. And we were perceived as being more easily picked on because we wouldn't stand up. And and a little bit more about my family. My parents were very involved in the community, in their church, in their Korean immigrant church, and they were leaders. And my mom had a ministry, or she served the poor. She served low-income families for more than 35 years. And I would even, witness this in the home where she would, feed people, help people, cry with people. Like there was this one Korean man who was standing on the corner. He had one leg on the street and a car just came, hit him, and he lost his leg.
Oh my
and he lost his ability to work. And I just remember, my mom crying for him and his wife. So anyway, so they were strong role models for me for giving back. And I realized I think I'm talking a little bit longer than I should for this first question. So I'll stop here.
Well, Sylvia, I was just going to say, for me, what you bring up, it's fascinating because there's this dichotomy or very big contradiction for me, because your experience is so similar to my experience growing up in Montreal.
Yes.
So similar. And, I wanted to be white because of the internalized racism that I experienced, because that was what it was to be fitting in and normal. But my experience of Vancouver, so I did my pre-doctoral internship there at UBC. It was about 2001, 2002. And I'd never experienced cultural inclusion the way that I did when I was there, because everywhere I looked, there were Asians, there were mixed race couples who were of a senior generation. I was like, oh my gosh, this doesn't happen in Edmonton, Alberta, where I'm from. And there were magazines about the banana, and there were talks at, UBC at the time. And I felt this affinity that I'd never experienced before. So it's interesting to hear what you say.
That is interesting, because that was at the time when I was editing Rice Paper magazine in 2002, 2001, around that period. And we felt there wasn't enough for those Asians in Vancouver. So maybe you were coming from like a drought and it was just a little bit greener. But those of us who were in Vancouver felt like we were constantly asked, where are you really from? Because we would be asked, they would be trying to pinpoint what ethnicity we were in, in a roundabout way. And, most of us, we would always say, oh yeah, I'm Canadian, but where are you really from?
Yeah.
But, Gina, it's so fascinating that just about every Asian in our generation had the same experience, right? Because we didn't have the role models in the media. We didn't have role models in local government or Asians as teachers as they are now. And part of me wishes, wow, I wish I could have had that, and would I have been different? Because I did, what you're tackling the topic of mental health. I do believe I was depressed as a kid, and it could be because of these, these subtle microaggressions and not so subtle racist attacks on me as a kid. And when you're a child, you don't have the tools, you don't have the maturity to process that. And often, and Gina, you're the expert, and you also know Sam as a nurse, and you're doing your doctoral studies. But I mean, kids, they I don't know, react by suppressing it, or at least I did. I just suppressed it, and I had no way of knowing how to ask for help, how to speak about it.
Sam's PhD research is right up this alley. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, it's really looking at anti-Asian racism and mental health of children. Yeah, so really speaks to so many stories that are out there with young Asian populations. It's very sad, and it's a sad reality that many of us have to face. So I'm really sorry that you had to go through those experiences in your past, but it has blossomed into something so amazing in your career. So let's jump into kind of the work that you're engaged in. And I know from your work and your career path, you really try to platform and amplify communities that are historically and systemically marginalized and oppressed.
Mhm.
So, do you want to tell us a little bit of what kind of inspired you to get into this work? What brings you into this
Yeah.
area?
Well, I'm just tearing up because I'm like, I haven't been asked this question in all of my career. So it's yeah, I guess it's I kind of feel like, oh, I'm with people who understand. Because in Asia, interestingly, they don't really understand the racism because they're surrounded by Asians, right? So, however, in Hong Kong, because of the British colonial past, they do understand the racial humiliation because the British really treated them horribly. Even though there were some Hong Kong Chinese who benefited, but it was very like they were the first class citizens and the Chinese were the second class citizens. And so I'm just surprised by my reaction, but it is a form of trauma, that the impact that racial discrimination can have, because it hits at the very core of your identity of who you are. And it's bullying, it's just this vitriolic mix. And I would say, because of the impact of that, and because of my personality, I am a fighter. I turned that that pain into fire and passion to want to make a difference and to highlight and tell the untold stories of ethnic communities or people who are marginalized, otherwise marginalized. So when I was at CBC, I tried to pioneer, more of that, more of the shining a spotlight on these minority groups, on these otherwise voiceless. And then from there, I shifted more towards women because of just where I was in Asia, and I had access to NGOs through my work in philanthropy for family offices of some of the wealthiest billionaire families in the world. And through journalism, through producing documentary films, I had access to survivors who were, able to share. And and the entry point was the Japanese military sex slavery issue, euphemistically known by that terrible euphemism, comfort woman. And I learned about this at 15, turning 16 in 1991. And that happened to be when it was around the time the LA riots were happening. And that really marked me because it was the first time that I realized that racism could spiral into this out of control, horrific, tragic event.
And Sylvia, wasn't it your mother who told you about?
Yes.
Yeah, I
Yes,
thought that was so interesting.
Yeah,
That a mother
yeah.
would tell you that.
Yeah, my mother would tell me, she told, because she was very intentional about sharing about Korean history, right? And so she wanted me to know, and she's a feminist, she wanted me to know that this history happened, that this is part of like the whole colonialism experience of the Japanese colonialism of Korea, which was brutal. They took away our language, they took away our dress. It was just a horrific experience from 1910 to 1945. And so I was compelled, I was captivated, if that's the proper word, or I just felt so angry about it, about this, the fact that the Japanese military had forced up to 400,000 girls and women, and girls who were as young as me. And that was when it was the first time in all my life at turning 16, that I could recognize that in my DNA that I am Korean, because I felt angry. I felt angry at the Japanese military and government. I felt so sad for the Korean women. And before this time, because of the experiences of racism, I whitewashed myself, and I disconnected from my Korean heritage. And so I researching and interviewing these survivors of Japanese wartime military sex slavery, it was just something that really, like, I felt compelled to do, because I didn't read any books on this in Canadian libraries. I didn't see any other books. So I felt that I had to write the book that I wanted to read at that time, in 1991. And so I guess that's, it's been a driver. My early experiences has shaped me. And what was really important for me was releasing the forgiveness and not bottling it up inside, because there was a period where, and I mentioned this to you before, Gina, where I was like very anti-white people. Oh, honky this, honky that. And I became, and interestingly enough, I married a white guy, a white Jewish guy. But it was interesting that for a short time, I became like them, right? That the wound that was inflicted in me, that I was, because it was still festering inside and I hadn't released it and just released the forgiveness. I became the perpetrator in some ways inside. And anyways, that is not what we want to do. We do not want to have racist attitudes, even towards the people who are that way towards us.
I was just going to say quickly about creative anger. I was just in a different presentation where this was brought up, and you are an exemplar of, the epitome of using your life in a way in advocacy, social justice work, with your writing and all that you do, and taking what you learned at a very young age and using that creative anger to a point of forgiveness. I just think that's beautiful.
Oh, thank you. Well, it shifted. So I was motivated by anger, and then in 2008, because I started the book writing journey of the Japanese wartime sex slavery issue in 2001, and then in 2008, this Japanese reconciliation team was apologizing to the Chinese, and then a friend called me. I happened to be visiting Hong Kong from Beijing. A friend called me and said, "You must come to this church. They're talking about Japanese war crimes, like Come for Women and rape of Nanking. You gotta come. They're gonna say sorry." And I'm like, I don't even feel Korean. I'm a white person trapped in a Korean body. Their apologies aren't gonna, they're not gonna touch me. But I went and I sat there just very skeptical. But when this group said sorry, and they weren't apologizing on behalf of the government, these are citizens. And I was so shocked that I wept like I've never wept before. And so did the Chinese. And they said, we're just so sincerely sorry on behalf of, us, the Japanese people. We want to say sorry to you. And then that somehow released the anger. And then that was that moment, that pivotal moment when I decided I need to shift gears and write for racial healing, for racial conciliation, and encourage people to forgive. And I produced a film called Healing River, and it's on a different Japanese reconciliation team, and they apologized to Chinese elderly survivors and their family members in China. And I've shown this film everywhere, including it aired at a film festival in Vancouver. And whenever I've shown it to Asian audiences, at least 3 to 5 people will be crying.
Mm.
And I would have to say at the end, if you have hatred, generational hatred in your heart, if there are stories that your grandparents have handed down or your parents about the Japanese, I want to encourage you as an act of your will to forgive and don't hold it in like I did. And I talk about how that unforgiveness is like a bitter prison. It prisons us. And anyway, I never expected that I would be like an anti-Japanese hate or anti-racism activist, after all these years. But it makes sense, like, with my, the childhood pain, and anyways, it's the journey thus far.
So powerful. That is such a powerful story, and it just demonstrates how pervasive and almost brutal racism can be, and
Yeah.
the effects that it can have on people, like not just at one time, but intergenerationally, and affect your whole being and how you see the world. But
Yeah.
the ability for you to self-reflect and release that anger is so powerful, and something that so many people can follow suit. And you're such an inspiration. And then taking that pain and releasing it, and then turning it into the career that you have, and writing these stories and amplifying voices is just incredible and beautiful. We were actually wondering if you had any of the books that you have written with you that we can
Yeah.
show the audience.
Oh, sure,
Yeah.
sure. Well, I
Yeah.
only have one book. So this
Okay.
is my Long Road to Justice book, Stories from the Frontlines. And I'll show my husband's book because I don't have my Silence No More, Voices of Comfort Woman book. So these are the books. And I have a story to share. It's relevant to the Asian hate crimes. So this was in 2017. My husband and we went on a cross America speaking tour. We actually started in Vancouver, my hometown, and spoke there, and we were launched there into California, and then we went eastwards and ended up in Connecticut. So we were driving through all of these small towns in America, and there was one vintage store, this antique store that we went into, and the Caucasian man, the owner, all of a sudden I'm in there. My husband, he ignores my husband. I guess he didn't know that we were together, and he's zeroing in on me, and he's just so rude. He's just so rude, and I can't remember exactly what he was saying, but I was like, what can this be? Like, this is like 2017. And I'm like, I almost, you almost think maybe he's having a bad day. This guy can't be so, hating Asians that he's targeting this at me. Like, I almost couldn't believe it. I was so shocked. And that's how I felt when I was seeing these images over the last few years of Asians being attacked, of Asian women, being punched in Vancouver or slapped, all for wearing masks. And so anyway, I just wanted to share that anecdote, that because, when we think, okay, racism's gone, right? In our day and age, race, like I was thinking that at that time in 2017, I didn't really think about racism for a long time. As I've been living in Asia, I'm surrounded by Asian people. And to have that experience, it was just really jarring. It was, I was just so shocked. And Matt saw it, my husband. And that's when he realized, wow, there are people who are still frozen in time. And he has his attitudes from probably his parents and the generation he grew up in, the cultural milieu.
True, and it's so unfortunate that in 2022, even 2017, when this occurred to you, that it's still happening, that it's still a reality for so many people.
So shocking.
Yeah.
So shocking.
It's very shocking and it's unfortunate. Yeah. And these are the types of challenges that as Asian people we face on a daily basis, and it's quite traumatic. And so can you tell us about kind of the challenges that you have faced being an Asian woman, in different contexts of the world, in different locations, and how that kind of really affected your career and the ways that you navigated that?
Yeah. I had a challenge in speaking up early on in my career, especially when I was surrounded by older men or Caucasian men. And I think it comes from partly the filial piety, like the Confucian
Yeah.
value of when you're younger, you defer, you show deference to older people, you show deference to your manager and your boss. And so in my Korean culture, it's very ingrained, like it's very age hierarchical.
Yeah.
I think it's similar in the Chinese and other Asian groups. And so I couldn't break out of that, even though I could see when I wasn't the only woman, and I'm with other American or other Caucasian, European women, they didn't have that. And I could perceive it. I could see the difference between Asians and Asian women versus the Caucasians. There was no age hierarchy or limit. And so that was something that I tried to work on, that I was conscious of. And I don't feel like it hindered my career as much, but I wonder, well, maybe I could have gone farther in my role a lot earlier, perhaps. I don't know. And there were times when I was in mainland China and I was representing my American company, and the Chinese government officials, because I had to do government relations, were expecting a white middle-aged male. And here I am, I show up and they're like, I could see they're just bewildered because they're like, who are you? You look Chinese. And, I'm speaking bad Mandarin. And, they were just really amused and didn't know how to handle me. And I didn't know how to get over the awkwardness for a long while, but eventually I learned that, hold my own and speak to them. And because they could sense my awkwardness in those early years. And then, they didn't want to talk with me very long because they didn't perceive that I was important. And so it took me a while to get over because back then I looked really young. And you know how Asians can look like, 5 to 10 years younger than they are. So I even wore glasses to make myself look serious, make myself look smarter, to be taken more seriously. And so now I feel, what? I shouldn't have cared. And that's the advice that I would give to people, that, just don't care. and try not to limit yourself, just because our culture, it dictates that we have to defer, like, you just don't do that in the workplace. And another thing that I've heard someone say is that a lot of Asian women feel silenced. And I wonder if that's because in our culture, we're not encouraged to speak out. We're not considered human, and we're property until women are married. I mean, this was 100 years ago, or so long ago. And I hear this from a lot of Asian women, and it took me a while to find my voice. It took me a while to get to the point where I felt comfortable being a badass, because I am a badass, but I felt apologetic. Like I was like, oh, I should be a good Asian woman. I should be, and then when I felt like some people were like, wow, she's a bitch. And they were harder on Asian women leaders than on a male counterpart. And my husband saw that because we were working on a campaign in Hong Kong, and he felt like, wow, they really unfairly judge and criticize a strong Asian woman. And in Hong Kong, this is where the term dragon lady originated from. And perhaps it's because women had to overcompensate to get ahead, right? And but for the last long while, I've owned my badassness, and I don't care, I don't care as much. I mean, maybe that's with age, getting older.
I love it, badass. You describe a very, I think, common psychological process of coming into our own, and developmental from having experienced race-based traumatic stress. And, who doesn't crawl into a shell and begin to sort of peek out and see what's safe? And you really exemplify how to do that and how to find your badassness. And I love it. So do you feel that your voice is being heard? How do you feel about that badass voice now? Is it having the impact that you want?
I haven't really thought about the impact so much. I just write, and then I am surprised when I get feedback, when people tell me, especially women, that they really enjoyed and appreciated what I've done. So I haven't really thought about the impact, but I hope there is. I hope that it's for the women who are enslaved, the women and children in child sex trafficking and exploitation. So I guess on that level, I don't feel like I've had enough impact. I feel like I can do more. So in this area where I'm advocating and trying to raise awareness, I'm on the raising awareness side. I'm not a Frontlines person. I'm someone who highlights and writes about those who are exploited, the voiceless women and children and even men. So that's why I always feel like, I need to do more. There could be more. And I grew up with a strong mother, who was a leader. She didn't have any limits. I mean, she drove the bus for senior citizens at church. She did things that men would do. So I had other role models and who didn't have limitations. Apparently my late grandmother was like that. She was a badass. And she was very direct. She was like, for instance, my uncle was in the Vietnam War, but he was working in the Korean embassy, and she wrote directly to the ambassador and said, I need my son. And I can't remember what the reasons were, but she basically said, release my son. And he did. He was able to go back home early because she asked. And so I don't feel hindered at this point in my life, but I think it is harder when you're just starting out.
Yes.
And when you're younger and when you're more junior in your career or company, and you're wondering, what is the impact if I say this or if I write about this. I've had that, of course, in the early days, but as I'm older, as you get more established, it's a little bit easier, but with the the social media is not easy, right? And it can be fickle. So I don't really go out there and express like something so extreme like that. That's not my personality. But that if that answers your question, I feel like I could do more, and I hope that more women, especially Asian women, Asian Canadian women, Asian Americans, because we're bridges. And I've been telling people this over the last few days, because I wrote a post on LinkedIn that went viral about me being called to change and struggling. You know, my greatest pain was experiencing racism, but that led me into my justice journey. That was my entry point and my motivation for doing the justice work that I do. But this story went viral, and I've had hundreds of messages come in from people, even non-Asians, but they're like, Italian or Greek or, and they're saying, wow, I've experienced the same thing. And, it's just, I understand, I relate, it's so painful. And all I could say is, just, release it, and it's made you a stronger person.
I think you're very humble in saying that you don't think you've made, the impact, and I know you have lots more to make an impact about, but you certainly have, lots to share, and people are listening. You have a captive audience just because of your way of being. So you are being humble. I wanted to turn a little bit back to what you talked about, your experience, when you were at the store with Matt and, had that white individual kind of treat you the way that he did. I've had that sort of jarring experience myself. And also thinking about, Michelle Go and Christina Yuna Lee, who, New York Asian women citizens brutally murdered just because they were Asian. And so, there are these acts of denigration and, shunning and all these kinds of things. But the fact that, women are brutally murdered for being Asian. So my question is, how do you navigate anti-Asian racism while trying to advocate for the human rights of women, Asian women?
Yeah, it's not something that I've been asked, so I think that's why I felt like, verklempt earlier, because no one asked these questions in Asia. and only Asian Canadian or Asian American or people who've lived overseas from Asia can truly understand. So this understanding is so powerful, to be understood, to feel, and maybe that's why my post on racism as a child resonated, because people felt like, and they had never shared these stories before. They felt like, wow, me too. That's what happened to me. So in my work on, exposing and investigating sex trafficking, modern day sex slavery, and also unearthing and telling the untold stories of historical military sex trafficking by the Japanese military and Japanese government, there is racism embedded in both, right? Because with the Japanese military, they were discriminating, like the lowest prices of the tickets to the rape stations, the comfort stations, the cheapest price were the darkest skinned women, the darker skin, the Indonesian and whatnot, Papua New Guinea, and then the most expensive were the Japanese. So it was almost acceptable to the Japanese military and government to en masse force Koreans and Taiwanese, because they were colonizing these countries, and their whole impetus for going into World War II was they wanted to rescue all of the other Asian inferior race groups. And so that, seeing that, learning about that, I realized, wow, what's happening today still is the same thing. It's the same racial discriminatory system. And there was this sign, there's this photo, which is iconic to me, in Hong Kong, where they show the pricing of women, and Russian women are at the top, Thai women are at the bottom. And so racism fuels sex trafficking. And even in mainland China, Vietnamese women, North Korean women are trafficked as brides.
Say that again,
And
our trap.
they're trafficked as brides.
Okay.
Bride trafficking.
Mm.
Bride trafficking. And Myanmar women. And so, you know, the element of, you know, these are inferior groups are at play. And so I guess I haven't really intentionally thought about the anti-racism part. I mean, it comes through in the writing, but I guess it's something that subconsciously I'm just exposing, you know, as a package. And what I really feel passionately about is the racism in Japan. Towards the Koreans and the Chinese, and the Pachinko series on Apple TV does a powerful job of exposing it to the world. And there were scenes in Pachinko that, wow, I was like, yeah, I experienced that as a kid, you know, where there were looks that they were able to really illustrate beautifully, looks that they were giving to the Korean woman, you know, saying, oh, that kimchi's so smelly. And I was like, whoa, this is what they illustrated racism.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so I don't know if that answers your question, but fighting racism and promoting racial healing, racial conciliation is at the heart of why I am writing about these things. Hence, when I've had people like Japanese people question me about that, it really, it's, you know, I feel a little bit bad, a little bit sad about that, because I'm not pointing a finger. I'm not saying, you know, you're bad, but this topic is so sensitive in Japan and in certain, you know, communities. But if we don't talk about it, it will remain sensitive. And that's why what you're doing, bringing women together as a forum and the youth together, it allows us to speak about it, right? These unspoken things, so that we don't feel alone. And I've been telling this to people on LinkedIn, you know, after they were telling me about their own personal experiences. And I said, I wish we had known that we weren't alone, right? So many, countless people said, you know, this is what I went through, but I didn't tell anyone. And, you know, and how tragic. So the importance of what you're doing is so immense.
Thanks, Sylvia. When I, you know, getting more familiar with your work, I could see how the lens of what you're doing is through an anti-racist, anti-oppressive lens. So, you know, that thread through what you say might not be directly acknowledging that, but it is, you know, it's just so in the bones of the work that you do. So
and you know who a large majority of the people who were responding were those who had darker skin color, African, Canadian American, South Asian. And I mean, what it is like, you know, the Jim Crow era, right? Like what we've experienced is a touch of that. I mean, we were never sold on blocks, you know, standing there and sold off to families, but the root of it is the same. And the root of, and racism is violent, you know, like the lynching that went on to African Americans. And so when I was seeing the violence towards Asians, it made me wonder, like, why is racism so violent? Yes, it's fear-based, right? So is it because people are afraid, like it's fueled by fear and they're acting out? But that's something that I'm pondering, like, why is racism so violent? And even in Japan, around this Japanese wartime military sex slavery issue, the Comfort Woman and rape in Nanking, there have been instances where the right wing stabbed a mayor in Nagasaki because he was talking about this issue in public. He stabbed him, and the right wing are violent in Japan. And there were a few instances where we were near Yasukuni Shrine, where these generals, who should have been indicted, in a tribunal, but they're enshrined, like a dozen of them they're enshrined and celebrated and honored in Yasukuni. And we were there, and there were these right-wingers who were like surrounding us, like being very intimidating. And I was like, wow, this is so unlike the stereotype of Japanese people who are, considered very meek. So there is a common thread about racial discrimination. And if you know of any, researchers or any kind of papers about the link between violence and racism, I would love to take a look.
I bet you Sam has ideas. I've got some ideas. I mean, do you want to go ahead, Sam?
You can go ahead,
Okay.
Gina. Yeah, you go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think fear, when people are afraid, it puts them into a place of rage. And to express that in anger is violence, is kind of this way of moving it through. And because it's, when you're afraid of something or someone, power over is best exercised through physical taking over. So that's where I would think that it all gets culmination of all kinds of emotions, and you shouldn't be here and you have no right, and then using brute force to demonstrate that is just this power. You get big, and guns a-blazing would be my thought around why it comes in that form.
Thank you. Yeah, no.
Kind of looking at it from like a different lens as well, because like the fear and the anger that comes out, it's more like an interpersonal thing. But that's only because oftentimes this violence and this discrimination is rooted in something that's institutionalized, right? That's systemic. And so when policies are created that make it legalized to discriminate against someone because of their race or because they belong to a certain social location and a certain social identity, it really roots these kinds of behaviors and makes it okay, even though it's not okay, but it gives justification to people that they can do this type of behavior to people, which is very unfortunate, and how it just demonstrates how expansive and pervasive racism really is to so many different communities.
Yeah, no, thanks for sharing those insights. Yeah.
So well said, Sam. I'm looking at the time. We could talk, to you for hours, Sylvia. We've got a few more questions left. I do want to ask you about your own mental health and how you've navigated that, and if you've had any struggles in your lifetime.
Sure. Yeah. So when I went through a divorce in 2007, I was depressed for several months, and I lost a lot of weight. But that was a wake-up call for me. And it wasn't so much, I didn't love the person that I was married to for a year. It was, I married for the wrong reasons. I rushed into it. But what was the root of my depression, and I wasn't clinically diagnosed, but it was failing. As an Asian, as a good Asian, I performed, and I get my affirmation from excelling and achieving. And, back then, I mean, my identity is now rooted in who I am, not in what I do. And that's just so, it was such a powerful shift, mindset shift. So yeah, there have been times when I've been depressed, like, after the divorce, and I've experienced secondary trauma after listening and interviewing these elderly survivors of Japanese military sex slavery, and also when I was interviewing some of the modern day sex slaves all over Asia, and I was nearly killed in a notorious brothel area in 2012, was it? and we were surrounded by goons or thugs and mama-sans who thought that I had taped their business, their illegal business of forcing girls into sex slavery and forcing them to sell themselves. They thought that I videotaped it and posted it on Weibo, that's China's Twitter. And but I think what's helped me so much is being rooted in my faith, my Christian faith, in my community. I believe in getting therapy, in counseling. I believe in that. And I, after my divorce, that was the wake-up call. And I went into counseling to process everything, to learn why I divorced, to learn what were the factors that led me to make that decision. Interestingly, it was the unresolved issues with mom and dad and everything. I mean, Gina, you will know as a psychologist, and you may too, Samantha, through your doctoral research, everything roots back to mom and dad. It wasn't even about, the marriage. And so I think that's what's helped me, and doing, regular self-care. Every Saturday, I don't do anything. I just rest. That's my self-care. Because if I don't, I will burn out. I have burnt out after leading the campaign that just went, international, because there was so much momentum, so many things happening, and I felt like, I can't take a long rest. I'll do half a day, once a week. So yeah, that's how I've coped. And I try to be very intentional about speaking with good friends. So I do have some good friends I've known, forever, that I will call for certain issues. If I feel like, the friends in Asia who I've known for, 11 years, if they may not have the context of my full life. So I would encourage everyone to, go to some kind of therapy, or whether, and I journal. I journal regularly. And when I don't journal, I realize, okay, there's some emotional constipation going on. So yeah, that's how I cope. I mean, I have to. I've seen, too many people burn out, in the anti-trafficking field, especially frontline workers. I'm not a frontline worker. I'm too sensitive to be one, and I admire them intensely. I think they're heroes. And my husband, he was frontline, and then he shifted more towards working with corporations, which is a lot lighter, but it still can get heavy. And so we do all we can to refresh ourselves, and make sure we're not just not taking on too many burdens. Yeah.
Thank you so much for being vulnerable and sharing your story on your mental health journey and just your journey itself. It's really empowering for so many people. And you quickly mentioned there people that you admire on the front lines, or people who are your heroes. So are there any, role models or mentors that you kind of turned to when you were navigating your career, or just any stage of your life? No?
Well, too many mentors to name. I mean, so many, amazing older people. And because I didn't have my extended family in Vancouver, and most of them were in Korea or in the US, I actively sought out people who were like my second grandfather, or my second grandmother, or my aunties. I had a lot, because I didn't have that, because we immigrated to Canada. And so I would say, and no, not in any order, but my mom was and has been my number one supporter. And I think I wrote about this in my latest book, but when I was writing my previous book, I took a sabbatical, and this was before I got remarried to my wonderful husband, Matt Friedman. So I wrote my book in my parents' basement, and there was like a period of 3 months where my mom was bringing me food while I was writing. The writing was so intense, and my mom was bringing me food like breakfast, lunch, dinner. And without her, I couldn't have finished my book. And she was the one who encouraged me to dream bigger. And yes, she was part Tiger mom, so she wouldn't let me go into theater. I went into TV journalism, but I'd say, yeah, my parents have been pretty supportive, throughout. And my husband has been the one to, just be this wise sounding board and inspiration, because he's so radically committed to helping people come out of slavery, helping to end the scourge of slavery. And there are other older women, like Mrs. Wong, who is actually part Chinese, part white. There's just so many. Anne in Vancouver. Just countless. I feel like if I name one and I don't name the other, I'm going to stop. But what the commonality is, they were willing and happy to share their wisdom with the younger generation, and they took time out, even though they didn't have to, and they were willing to sit with me, and they were willing to just uplift me with words of encouragement or prayers, even, because some of these mentors were Christian. And I feel like I believe in the power of prayer, and they were able to help guide. Like when I was making big decisions, I would run it by people, because I really don't encourage anyone to be a lone wolf. Try to run, your major decisions by people you trust and respect and admire. And that way, you're not going to make major mistakes as easily if you have that kind of guidance and accountability.
And that's so important, to find mentors and role models that can share that wisdom, that can uplift you, like you said.
Yes.
So I guess, like, in one sentence, how do you envision as you step into kind of a mentorship role after all the advocacy work that you do? And how do you envision yourself in terms of mentorship, and what's meaningful to you, and what do you want to give back to future generations?
Yeah, no, I've been mentoring since I was 19, actually. But there are different seasons when I mentor more. I was a youth director at a church in Vancouver from when I was 19. And I did that for about 2.5 years, 3 years, nearly 3. So I've been, mentoring and taking care of quite a number of kids over the years who didn't have strong parental bonds. And there were this one brother, sister, where their parents were missionaries in China, ministering to North Koreans. And, I was like a big sister to them. And even now, it happens organically lately. There was a time when I just, Jim Yong, the former World Bank chief, I remember he said a quote like, "I just want to mentor as many people as I can." And I just, every time he speaks to somebody, he's just trying to help them. And that was me for a long period in my life. Like, I just wanted to mentor as many people as I can. Now I'm at a point where, because I'm working on a movie that's based on my book, a feature film, and I have other, projects, my time is so limited. So I am more strategic. Like, I'm mentoring more leaders, like women leaders who can then mentor others, a lot of other people. So yeah, that's where I'm at. And through my writing, I hope I can mentor people, because I'm sharing like the good, the bad, the ugly. And it's through sharing my mistakes that I hope, it will be, a source of wisdom for someone else and prevent them from making the same mistake. So, I mean, I never expected to be, the cautionary tale, but if I can help prevent someone from rushing into marriage, heck, I hope so.
Well, you're definitely an inspiration and a mentor in, I think, more ways than you know, just with your LinkedIn posts and your way of being. And you made a perfect segue to my last question, which is a little bit of a surprise, but when you talk about your book, A Long Road to Justice, and the future that it has, I know that there's some amazing things that are happening. Can you give us an update?
Sure. So I will find out soon if this one particular film production company will take on my film. And there is another Korean entertainment company that's also interested. So it's nice to be wanted. And it just so happens we're at a point in history where, Korean stories are hot, Asian stories are hot, with the success of Crazy Rich Asians and Shang-Chi. So this is the era that I long to see when I was in my teens, in university, in my 20s. I wished I could have seen more Asians on the silver screen. And so that's the update. And I'm also writing a book geared towards young people about philanthropy and my fighting sex trafficking journey, because my friend's daughter, who's 14, picked up my book, A Long Road to Justice, and started to read it. And then the mom said, well, it might be a little bit too advanced for you right now. And then she asked me, what do you think? I said, yeah, she should wait a few more years. So out of that, I felt, because other young people were also wanting to read it. And I want to finish this book that is geared towards that age group and have it be friendly for that age, because my book has a lot of, some of the descriptions might be too, not age sensitive for a 14-year-old. So that's it. And then there's another possible film collaboration to raise awareness about human trafficking as well. Eventually I will do like an inspirational rom-com, but until then I'm going to birth these projects. And no, thank you for asking, Gina. You are also an amazing, incredible mentor and role model, and you're just a beautiful human being. And Samantha, I'm also encouraged by you. You are so put together, far more than I ever was at your age. And so, you're gonna do very well. You have a very bright future ahead of you. So thank you.
Well, we can't thank you enough. As I said, we could talk for more hours, but we'll end it there, and just want to express our gratitude. I think you said it was 7:30 a.m. in Hong Kong when we started, and so to take this time and spend with us and share your stories, and just thank you so much.
Thank you. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.